So back in August this year, we were making a trip from Wyoming out to the northeast, and as we were going through Lusk, Wyoming, little town on the Nebraska border, we saw in the distance something interesting, and it caught our eye, and we started filming. As we came closer, we realized it's actually a designated historical site for a Redwood water tank. It might sound curious as a historical site, but it was built by the now defunct, long defunct, Wyoming Central Railway back in 1886. And the purpose, of course, of this water tank, as you probably guessed because it's along the train tracks, is that it stored water for the steam engines that pulled the trains. It was originally filled by a windmill and then by other sorts of pumps. What makes this one interesting significant is that it's one of only 6 Redwood water tanks remaining in the entire country.
Yeah, I found it interesting that it was made out of redwood because that's not a tree that's indigenous to the area. So obviously they had to ship in the wood in order to even build this. Most water tanks in the area now are metal, and I don't know of any wooden ones. I have seen wooden ones before, but not ones that are functional.
That is an interesting point, Melanie, that I had not thought about myself previously. But yeah, you don't find redwoods growing around southeast Wyoming. Mostly cottonwoods, and those are only along creeks or rivers or something. So that must have been quite a project, harvesting redwood way over on the west coast and shipping it across the Rocky Mountains to eastern Wyoming along the Nebraska border. So I'm assuming there must have been reasons why they chose redwood, like probably water durability and things, I would suppose.
Yeah, maybe it's because you still get some winter weather around the area, so I would think it would have to hold up under winter conditions as well.
They definitely get winter weather around there. We mentioned that we were in Lusk, Wyoming, when we found this redwood water tank. Frank Lusk was a director and a local agent for the Wyoming Central Railway, the aforementioned defunct railway. And that railway was headquartered in Lusk, Wyoming. Lusk also happened to be home to the only post office on the route. Frank Lusk was also an agent for the Pioneer Townsite Company, which sounds like a curious name for a business. But the Pioneer Townsite Company was responsible for establishing the locations of depots and platting town sites in that area. And so the Pioneer Townsite Company was instrumental in founding and building a number of towns around there, including Van Tassel, Node, Lusk, Manville, Keyline, Lost Springs, Shawnee, Orrin, Douglas, Glen Rock, and even Casper, which is one of the larger cities in the state now. But we went through a lot of these little towns during our trip.
We did. We even did a live drive on Casper. So, but I'm curious about Mr. Lusk here. He seems to be a very entrepreneurial or kind of spirit here. I thought that was just interesting in itself that he's not only the agent, but he founded all these towns, really.
He seems to have been well connected.
Yeah.
Had quite a career there. One of the things I learned recently, this kind of brings it up, as I always understood, or for many years understood, at least from watching Western movies growing up, that where the railroad went through, what town the railroad went through, often had a big impact on whether a town survived and thrived or became a ghost town. And what I learned in the last year or so, studying some of the Western U.S. history, is that a lot of times it was literally the railroads that built the towns. They founded the towns. And even like all these towns we just mentioned, but even up in Gillette, Wyoming, where we're based this past summer, it was just a little tent city camp along the Donkey Creek. I think it might have been for mining, but don't quote me on that. But the railroad was going through, and they were looking at going a few miles away from Gillette initially, and one of the guys that worked for the railroad, Edward Gillette, figured out that if they deviated a few miles through what is now known as Gillette, it would save the railroad a bunch of money and make the route easier. So they did. They named the town after him. But the railroad literally founded Gillette as well. So a lot of the towns out in the West were literally founded by railroads. And in other cases, there were towns that were there initially and the railroad went a different direction, and some of those towns did become ghost towns because they were cut off from transportation or goods and services.
Yeah, I mean, this was all before the highway system, so once the highway system came in, I'm sure that there was a certain consolidation of the rail lines.
Yeah, the federal interstate system is a fairly recent thing as well, and that also had a lot of impact on on towns.
Yeah.
The railroads were pretty essential when it came to the development of the American West as we know it today. They were responsible for things like livestock shipments, mining supplies, and providing a source of coal to much of the rest of the United States. So they were a very competitive industry, and they were also very big business.
The Niobrara County Historical Society obtained the tank in 1971 and has since repaired it and restored it with the community and individual support.
I hope you all found this little peek back into American history interesting. We sure were intrigued by it when we come across it back in the summer, all the way back to the 1880s. And of course, the thing still stands. So someone must have built it well, I guess. And I know they did some restoration work, but that's amazing that it's still standing there all these years later. But I hope you enjoyed this video, everybody. If you did, hit the like button if you haven't already. Consider subscribing to the channel if you have not yet done so. And we will catch you in the next video.